Welcome to CMC-Cast Conversations about Composing, a podcast where we delve deep into the art and craft of composing music. Here we bring together composers from all corners of the globe, exploring a myriad of styles, genres, and traditions. Our long-form discussions aim to provide listeners with a unique glimpse into the most intimate aspects of artistic creation. Join us as we uncover the stories, processes, and inspirations behind the music, straight from the composers themselves. Welcome to a journey through the inner world of composing. Please take your time. To ensure the greatest possible authenticity, this cast is unedited, except for a few pauses during the conversation. We aim to preserve not only the content, but also the unique speaking styles of our invited guests as much as possible. Our guest today, Sandeep Bhagwati. Born in Bombay, he studied in Salzburg and Munich, was a freelance composer for many years. Then taught at prestigious institutions like the Karlsruhe University of Music, Heidelberg University, the California Institute for the Arts. Since 2006, he is a research professor at Concordia University, Montreal, where he founded the MetroLab, a lab for research and creation across arts and disciplines. A proponent of comprovisation, Bhagwati innovation fuses the realms of composition and improvisation. His fascinating works, such as Miyagi haikus, beautifully interweave elements of Indian and other Asian musical forms with Western classical styles. For almost 3 decades now, Bhagwati has explored new ways to artistically use music technology and especially artificial intelligence in sound. His innovative approach has earned him the European Composition Prize. In Quebec, the new music concert season 2023-24 has been dedicated as an homage season to his work. So join us for a conversation with Sandeep Bhagwati, a musical thinker and thinking musician whose work dances to his own rhythm. Yes, hello, Sandeep.
Hello.
I'm very happy that you took the time to come here to this podcast and to talk about music and about composing. And as usually, I will start this conversation with the same question for everyone. The question is, do you think that a composer, regardless of genre or background, thinks differently about music than people who play or listen to music without composing it? In short, do you think there is a special perspective of the composer on music?
Thank you for the question and thank you for inviting me. That's a very, for me, already a complicated question because as both of us know, composers are not everywhere in each culture. The idea that there's somebody called a composer is not something that is present in every culture. Or rather, the agency of composing is distributed differently in each musical tradition. So in some traditions they maybe somebody improvises all the time and thereby composes the music in improvising people call it composition in real time. In other traditions, there are people who devise scales or certain melodies, but no one plays them like that. They're just hints on how to do something. They're examples rather than concrete compositions. So all of that, keeping that in mind, there is, of course, a practice that you and me have both learned, which is composing. And it's largely oriented towards a kind of European history of writing music. And I think that people who engage in this kind of practice do have a different perspective on what they want music to be. And it's a little bit like comparing somebody who eats a dinner to somebody who has to prepare a dinner. And one of the first things that comes to my mind is that the temporal dimension is very different. So if you eat something, or even if you like to look at it only, the thing is there in the moment. It's there when you see it, when you eat it. When you have to cook the dinner, you have to think ahead a long time. You have to buy the things first that you want to, or find the things that you want to cook, then prepare them in a certain way, always with the mind on the final product, without the product being there.
Yes.
For example, you have to cut the vegetables in a certain way, in this way, not in another way, because in that particular dish that you want to do, they have to be cut in this way. So there's a wholly different time dimension involved. And musicians who play music, they also have a time dimension. They have to practice the piece and they have to find their way into the piece. But they're performing something that they that somebody has thought through, and they know it will work if they find the right way to do it. As a composer, you have no idea whether it will work. It's like opening your fridge or going out into nature, finding a few grasses and a few mushrooms and a few things, and then say, okay, so what is the best thing to cook out of these things? So for me, this is the adventure of composing, is to say, this music does not exist. What should it be like? And this is for me the exciting part, to imagine something that is not there, and you take steps to make it appear. It's almost like magic, right? Like a magic ritual, where you do this and then do that, and then you prepare this, and then you write down that, and then you think about maybe what kind of an importance does the sound have? Do I want to give it more importance or less importance? Is this instrument the right instrument? And so on. So you're constantly engaged in negotiating something that is not yet real. And for me, that is one of the pleasures of engaging in this practice of composing, is that you imagine something that will be tangible and will happen only for a short moment in time. You don't have the time later on to correct it. It will only happen as a musical performance, and you try to prepare everything so that the musical performance can go well.
Yeah, well, what you answer brings an idea to me. I think it could be very nice to imagine when you, for example, are a piano player and have a piece by Beethoven. Let's say Moonlight Sonata, something very famous. So the Moonlight Sonata is something that is like a brand, like Coca-Cola or like other brands. And to imagine that there was a time where the Moonlight Sonata did not exist. And then there was an empty piece of paper, and then it had been written for the first time. Is this what you mean, that it does not exist, and then in a very magic way it comes on the paper, or not only on the paper, it can also be other possibilities. I mean composing not only by writing a score. Composing means Latin componere, to put together. So, and you can put together on a paper, you can put together in other ways.
It's partly this. I mean, everything that is there was not there at some point. So I don't think if that's this peculiar specialty of composing. But what I mean is that even before it's there, before, say, somebody improvises, let's put it that way, say improvising as a composition in real time, somebody sits down and starts playing, and it's some music comes out that others find interesting to listen to. That's of course always the other side of everything that we do. So others find it interesting to listen to this music that is being composed on the spot. But no one can do that unless they have prepared for it. At the very least, they have to know their instrument. They have to know the special ways in which they can play this instrument. But they also have to mentally or spiritually or in any other way prepare for this moment of emergence of something. And they need to be ready to accept it and to take it on and take it further and find a new path in it and so on. And it's really something where you can easily get lost in improvising. It's easy to get totally lost and to lose your way and do something, that no one understands and you don't understand it either. It's very easy. So in order to avoid that, you have to be trained to not lose yourself. And how do you do that? Which kind of practice is that? And if you do it in not real time, so to speak, and by writing or by patching things together on a digital workstation, even there, if you approach it with a kind of unplanned mind or unprepared mind, you will either take much longer or never arrive at it. I'm always interested by these stories of composers who took, after it was established that they were very good composers and that they have a career and everything, and suddenly they take 10 times to write the next piece, 10 years to write the next piece. What happens? And Sibelius has this story, almost 30 years of not writing a piece. Always trying, every day, and not getting there. After having written symphonies and being one of the most famous composers of his time, suddenly there's something that doesn't work anymore. Or Beethoven too. And other composers too, Dalla Bacco, a very famous Italian composer who, after a certain point, did not write anything anymore, or did not even perform anything anymore. And I wonder what's going on there. That maybe sometimes you can approach the things that you know well by imagining the situation in which it doesn't go well. And so for me that was always a very interesting moment in the career of somebody who is already trained to be a composer, knows everything, knows how to write for orchestra, knows everything, and yet cannot finish a symphony. What's going on there? It's this imagination that doesn't really present you with something that you think will be tangible, become tangible, be something that actually can live on its own. And you cannot prepare for this, you cannot prepare yourself or your thoughts for this event.
I would like to come back to this idea a little later, to continue it, and to go back to what you said just a few minutes ago. You cannot improvise without being prepared for that. And you said play the instrument, learn the instrument, and something like that. There was a quite famous ensemble, I think in the 1970s, 1980s or so, called New Phonic Art Ensemble with Vinko Globokar. And improvising always brings something unexpected on the one side. On the other side, you just put together what you already know. So, and the challenge of improvising is not only that you have to prepare for that, but also it is a very big challenge to come to the point not to play what you had played before. And so this New Phonic Art Ensemble concept at that time was to build up strategies not to repeat something they already played before in other combination, but to avoid that. So what do you think about this preparing and to come out of preparation? This is also not only in improvisation, but also in composing.
That leads me to something that I have been naming with the word comprovisation. To me, there is no really clear line between improvisation and composition. And such practices, the New Phonic Art Ensemble and others, have structured their improvisation in a way precisely to avoid repetition, to avoid habits. Now, everybody who has ever tried to get out of a habit knows how difficult that is. And so it is another kind of preparation. It is a kind of, you could call it a mental preparation or emotional preparation to be able to say, okay, I'm going to play today with you, but we're not going to get into our habits. It's very difficult. And that's what I meant by mental. You have to be mentally prepared to do that. Yes. It's not just that you have to be able to play the instrument. All improvisation and all composition needs a kind of method of getting into a mental state that has nothing to do with the sound per se. And if your initial question was, what is the difference between somebody who plays and somebody who composes, which may be the same person at different times or something. It's not a profession. But in the state of composing, I rarely think about sounds per se. I think about the entire landscape of sound in which this sound may be a part, and in which this, a little bit like a gardener never thinks about one piece of grass or one tree in isolation. You always think about the whole thing, how it works together, and what do you put together in order to make this kind of an experience.
So it's some kind of topography.
Kind of a temporal topography of sounds, and you try to because as a composer you very often do not play what you have composed. That's one of the peculiarities of especially Western European style of composing, that others should play what you have composed. So you have to even think through their minds and think, okay, so how would it feel for this percussionist to create this sound, and what do I need to tell them so that they can create it? How do I need to prepare them so that they can actually create a particular sound or a particular sequence, or do they have enough time in the way that they're working on, have these different things that they have to do. Do they have enough time to get to that other instrument in time, which is far away from them, without disturbing their balance or something? You have to really think about so many preparations. Like the cooking example was one example, but it's also like engineers have to think about, will the building fall if 10 people stand on this side and only one person on the other side? What do we have to do to counterbalance this? Yeah. So there are very many parallels to other professions here, in the way that you have to foreground or foresee situations that have not yet happened, and that you provoke with each decision that you make as a composer. You provoke a certain kind of happening, and it's not only the sounds that you put together. It's more, for me at least, it's more, what situation is the sound coming into?
Yeah.
And can I help it? Can I help the sound, and can I help the people who make the sound?
Well, this is a very beautiful thought, to think about the person who has to play it. I remember that one of my teachers, Hans-Werner Henze, once said to us, look at your score and look at it and find out whether there is something in the score the musician who shall play it dreamt of when he dreamed to become a musician. Is there anything of that in the score? And it brings me to the idea that composing for another person is a very, very delicate thing, because the other person has to move with their bodies as the other person has to move their bodies in a way you wrote down. So it would be as if you would touch the person and moving the person, and then you immediately know how delicate that is. Yeah, but therefore there should be some gentleness. Yeah.
I learned this lesson the hard way, by the way. During my studies, I wrote a piece for small orchestra and voice, and I conducted it too. And so there was the first rehearsal of this piece, and not all musicians had time to come, so we practiced with those who were there in the room and started. And I was still young and I didn't know my score that well yet. So I was with my head in the score, conducting, not paying too much attention to the others, because I wanted to see whether the sounds that I heard were actually the sounds that were in the score. And so I was totally occupied with this. And while this was going on, I suddenly heard a big bang, loud bang, huge noise. Yeah. And I wondered what was going on. I looked up and I saw that the big tum-tum, the big super gong, had fallen down. And then what has happened, you know? And so the percussionist said, well, the way that you write it, I have no chance of getting to the tum-tum in time, so I just threw my sting so that it would arrive at the right moment in your score, but then it fell down. So that was really a good lesson for me to say, to get the sense that whatever I write has real-world consequences for the people that I'm writing for, and that this poor guy did have no space to put the tum-tum near his other instruments, and then consequently one cannot write like this. So since that time I've always drawn up, for example for percussion, I've drawn up the setup for myself, how I would do it, because if I put it in the score, the percussionist will say, no, we'll do it differently. But when I know how it can be done, even when they come up with another solution, and it doesn't work for some reason, I can always say, well, if you take this setup, it will work. But I didn't want to give you instructions. But it could work with this. And sometimes that helps in the rehearsal. Then they say, okay, so, that's true. We could rearrange this in this way, and then it would work. But and I only write now sort of whatever can be achieved in this setup, right?
Yeah, let's have some tea.
Yeah.
I prepared for you, just to let you know, so-called sun moonlight tea. And it's a Korean tea, and it's called sun moonlight tea because usually green tea gets dried by heating it. That because it needs not to get in fermentation status to be done in one day. But this tea gets dried under the light of the moon and the sun. Yeah? And so it takes a little longer, and I hope you enjoy it.
It's very good.
Thank you. Yes, I need to finish this. So, yes. Let me come back to one point you mentioned. You said you said that there is a kind of magical thing how the things come together. This when you prepare everything and what comes together, in which way to find the right things to put together to compose. Yeah. What is for you this magic? What does it mean? Is it where are the ideas coming from? What do you think?
Yeah, at least when I work on a piece, there are thousands of influences that impinge on the piece. I'm reading texts, I'm reading maybe mathematical progressions, I'm trying to understand complex natural phenomena, many things that are on my mind, together with all the sounds and together with all the possibilities of putting sounds together, the sounds of the instruments and the sounds of the, lately very often sounds of natural phenomena and so on. And I always I believe I'm on the right path when I suddenly discover that two or more of these streams actually come together and produce something that is explained by all these streams. So, say I have thought about a mathematical progression, and I thought about a certain way the harmony could go. And I discover that when I do this harmony in this way, it also satisfies the mathematical idea, which I didn't think about when I wrote the harmonic progression. For example, it has the same length, or this thing, the melody that I whistled in my head, the other day, and which I remember now, and it has the same length as the harmonic progression that I made, or something like this. So very often things come together in a way that I think, okay, my mind has been working on these tracks separately. I have been occupying my mind differently. But in the end, they come together because it's still my mind. It's one mind. And I have dealt with them in a way that they come together. And sometimes, or very often, most of the time actually, they don't. So I'm very happy when it happens. And then I think that's the moment where I think there's a kind of magic happening, where you have thought about something for so long, and in so many different ways, circling it, that at some point it falls into place.
It's a nice wordplay. When it happens, it makes you happy.
Yes. And sometimes it appears after despair. You think, it's really can't do it. It's not going to work. I have to write another piece, or this idea really doesn't work. And then I go to sleep or something, and then I wake up and suddenly everything is clear.
Okay, let's just stop there for a while, because not to get too abstract for our audience, please explain how is your work day as a composer. I know every person has to do many things, the laundry and to buy food and everything. This is, where is the composer? Is there a schedule? Is it just happening? Or how can we imagine your day as a composer?
Yeah, I would like to say, in accordance with Puritan work ethics, that I would compose every day, but it's not true. In the normal way, I don't sit down at the desk and compose, except if I have to because there's a deadline and so on and so on. But very often, everything I do, in every activity that I do, in shopping and doing the laundry and doing the dishes and making food and cleaning up and everything, in all these workday things, in meetings with other people, in conversations, there's always a track, I think, in my mind running compositional thoughts. It's always there. I can always sense it, and I sometimes take mental notes, so to speak. Things that I want to work on later. And I don't write them down very often. My notebooks really are not about composition. I have notebooks, but I always write down texts in them, almost never composing ideas. And at some point, I get up and in the morning, when I do composing, I always do it in the morning after getting up immediately. And then I get up and say, today is the day where I have to compose. I cannot, that's the moment now.
What is the morning for you? For some people, the morning is 2 o'clock in the afternoon. For other people, it's in the middle of the night.
5 o'clock in the morning.
5 o'clock in the morning.
Something like that. 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning, depending. It has been getting earlier with age and children. So because smaller children, the night was fractured anyway, and sometimes it would be after you've calmed a child or you've been out anyway. And then I said, go to hell. I'm just going to work. I'm not going to go back to bed now. But lately it's been around this time, and when I can, the mornings are different, but one thing is clear. Usually after 10 o'clock at night, I cannot compose anymore. And that's for example, with my wife and me, we have very different circadian rhythms. She really starts all her creative and her writing and her research writing and so on can only happen once everything for the day is done. So that's usually 10 o'clock at night. And then she can write until 3 o'clock in the morning and sit there and be very peaceful with her books and so on. And that's exactly the time when I cannot do anything creative anymore.
Yeah, I can't imagine that for myself too. So it's too much world in my brain.
Exactly. For me, it needs to be the clean, and I don't even dress. I have to go take as I am in bed. I get up and sit at my table and don't eat, don't do anything beforehand. Just sit down and start writing. And these are special days in the year. There are not many in the year where this can happen. And then there's a period after this first impulse has been cleared up, and there's as in every activity, there's a lot of drudgery too. You have to write down the score properly. You have to check all the things. This I can do at any time. But this initial first writing, getting the piece on its tracks, that happens on certain days, and I'm not the person who would sit down every day to compose.
But what is for you the beauty of the morning?
The beauty of the morning is that, especially if it's early morning, there's no possibility that anyone will disturb me until 9 o'clock, at least. Means that until then, I really am free. as you know, and as many people have it, we don't live from composing, so we have day jobs.
Yeah.
Mine is a professor at the university, and I also manage several ensembles and so on. So there's lots of work to do in a very practical manner, letters to write, grants to write, administrative things to attend to. But until 9 o'clock, almost no one contacts me for this. And I can safely ignore all emails because I know they will not be in the office before 9 o'clock either. So that time is totally free, and I can extend it then if I'm really in a work flush. I just shut off everything and then go on.
But
that's the morning.
Let's keep there a little bit.
Yeah.
You said no one is disturbing you, but is there some mental status or state, or I don't know how to say it, that is very special in the morning and different from late afternoon, or from, so if there's some with your inner biology or so, let's call it that way. Is there in the morning some different that is better for your composing than, for example, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or is there some?
I cannot generalize it. I just know that if, let's put it in another way, if I'm starting a new piece, I usually start it in the morning. But not every morning has this special quality. So, and there are
work is so we have to, or our audience has to understand, there are basically two kinds of work. This what you could call the initially work that happens in the morning, and the work like make a fair copy of the score, or work out some other technical things that can be done everywhere. Anytime. Yes. But this initial work, do I understand right?
Yeah.
Only happens in the morning, and therefore it does not happen every morning. But if it happens in the morning. Is that right?
About, yes, that's what it is about.
But there are also during day such small initial moments when you think about composing.
Always.
Yeah. So that means you are always on the track.
Yeah.
But only in the morning you bring it to this, in this initial way, together. Right?
Yeah, sometimes I think that the day also serves as a filter. Because I have many ideas, and some people are of this disposition that they write out every idea that they have. For me, it's more like I use daily life as a filter, because if I forget the idea, then it's probably not been so interesting. That's my thought. So if the idea comes again and again, and gains weight and is somehow becomes more important for me, then I think, okay, so that idea is really knocking at the door very heavily. So I should really be concerned with what it has to say to me. And when I have, everybody has many ideas during the day. This would be interesting. Oh, it would be an interesting thing to do. Well, let's maybe do that, But then the next day you can't remember it. I think, okay, so then probably it was just, our brain is kind of producing ideas all the time. So maybe that was just a passing fancy, and and I'm looking for the things that really speak to me in a very insistent manner before I start a composition. And the work that I do lately has not much to do with writing a score anymore in the old sense. I often write for musicians who are themselves very good improvisers, and I know them, and I write for specific people. And what I write for them are really very basic instructions on what they can and should do, how they should behave to each other, how they should behave in a space, and so on, so on. So that's even more abstract. To take this cooking simile, I'm not writing a recipe for a cook. I'm writing instruction on how to make recipes. So it's a kind of meta composition. I'm giving others the opportunity to make their own composition within a sort of a framework in real time. So, and
this is what
I'm
called
comprovisation. That's what I call comprovisation.
Yeah.
And in this, it's even one step more removed from the actual sonic, but it never leaves my mind. But the idea has to be so compelling that others can remember it too. Not only do I need to be able to remember it, but the person, the musician who has to play it and has to compose needs to be able to remember it too. It has to be such a powerful and strong and easy idea that they don't have to look at the book or at the paper to remember it, because then they cannot improvise. So in this way, I'm really trying to suss out, to filter the many ideas that one might have, the many little things that might come up, and find something that is more insistent, more basic, more. That is currently my practice, and it is. So, what does composition mean there? It means, or composing means, to understand how something can work in a certain context with certain people, in a certain situation, and trying to make that situation into a musical one instead of a non-musical one.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's really beautiful. Let's continue another thought you were talking about a few minutes ago. You called it imagination. Well, the word imagination comes from imago, Latin word imago, that this is the picture inside yourself. Yeah? For example, if we say the word rose, then in your brain something red is showing up, and in my head something red showing up, even when there are also white roses. Yeah. So,
actually, something pink is showing up in my brain right now.
Yes. Oh, okay. So you're more advanced than that. Yes. Yeah. Great. Wonderful. Yeah. But there shows something up, and because everything from outside is coming every day, all the time, all these things are showing up in us. So, is there, or could you tell us a little bit about this, what I would call an inner monologue? Is there an inner monologue during the day? Or can I understand it as an inner monologue, what you said before, that when you are in a meeting or when you're somewhere else and then thinking about it, where does it happen? Because you have to talk to the people, but you're thinking on this. How is that?
Yeah. Of course, there are moments when I don't think of it, when I'm deeply involved in a conversation that is very personal or very tricky, very philosophical. But right now I'm not thinking about composition because I'm thinking intensely about what you're saying, and I try to find a good response. But as we all know, many conversations are quite predictable. And especially meetings are very much predictable in the way that they go, and many people say things that other people have already said. So that's the moment where I can tune out quickly and understand that if I miss 3 minutes of something, it won't be a great loss to me. And that moments, that's really when I start not dreaming. It's really something where I think, okay, so what is it with this little thing that I was thinking about? What is it about this chord, or what is it about this situation that I imagine between two musicians? How could I improve their relationship? How could I think about how they could produce a sound together that would really be interesting for both of them and for the listener? And so I might work on a little thing there and then take a mental note of it if it really convinces me. And then I apply the same filter again and say, okay, so if I remember it tomorrow, then it probably was a good solution. If I don't remember it tomorrow, then I need to work on the solution once more.
Let us go a little bit deeper into this thinking. Just make it about the chord you mentioned, about this chord. Is when you think about this chord, is it in a monologue or is it a dialogue? Is also the chord telling you something, or it's only you think about the chord?
Yeah, I rarely think about chords in an abstract way. There are sounds. I rarely think about, for example, notation. Right? I don't think okay, this is a kind of a chord and it has these notes and so on. I think about the sound that evolves in a certain way, that has a certain tendency in itself, and parts of it go up, parts of it go down, and so on. And they want something. They go somewhere.
They want something.
Yes, they go somewhere. They're on their way already, and they come together. For me, a chord is really a moment in time of several flows that go through.
Has it an individuality when it moves somewhere?
Yeah, not the chord as an entity, but as a it's like you see different streams, they go of energy, and they come together in one thing. And of course, because they came from somewhere, they will go somewhere too. And we just capture them. It's like a freeze frame, like a photo finish of a race. And I try to find out whether that goes into chaos, for example, or whether it goes into order. Am I catching this flow of energy just before it goes into unison and order, or am I catching it just before it explodes into something? And for me, most these kind of thinking processes really go are about how does the energy flow in a certain context. So if I'm not thinking, for example, of a sound, if I'm thinking of a constellation of musicians in space, how does the energy flow between them? How does how can they hear each other? If they hear each other, what do they hear of each other? Can I tell them to listen for something specific that would help them? Right? So in my scores, you can often see, listen to the trombone, but only to the pitches, not to the rhythms.
Yeah.
And that will help you do what you have to do.
Oh, yeah.
If you also take the pitch, if you want to do the rhythms too, then it will not help you, so to speak. That's what the kind of implication is.
Oh, yeah.
And so then this architecture of how they listen to each other becomes also a way of understanding how the energy between them flows.
Now, my next question is, I was watching, not only listening to what you're saying, but also how you moved. And you moved with your hands like this, and talked about energy. Let me give you some vocabulary and then to make up some ideas, perhaps, in your reply. Attraction, explosion, to feel attracted by something, to feel something disgusting, to yeah, some kind of words. These are because our emotional language, especially in German, but maybe also I'm pretty sure it's in English comparable, are all words of the physics. I feel attracted, I feel distracted, and I could explode. So yeah, words like that. But these are all words that sound to me, and yeah, like everything in physics. So what I can see or I can understand a little part of the universal thing. That's all about star explosion or implosions into black holes and all this. And it reminded me when you talked about your chords and your
Energy.
and the energy and how you described it with your hands.
Yeah, I mean that's a very that's a question about the metaphors that we use to describe something that we experience not as a metaphor. So it's not a metaphor. It's only a metaphor when I talk to you, right?
Yes.
It's like describing swimming. If you swim, you just swim. You don't metaphorize it.
Yes.
But then you say, oh, it's like, it's like this and it's like that and so on. So for me, the metaphors are fitting, and sometimes I use them too. And it's one of the branches of my scores, has a lot to do with poetry. Which means that I use individual phrases like 1,000 bees buzzing around my head, right? A musician who reads that phrase and is asked to improvise it can come up with something very clearly musical that I would have taken a lot of notes or a lot of instructions to describe, and the poetic phrase makes it very clear.
Yes.
And so that's what I've been doing for some 10 years now. I try to find not only precise instructions for how to do things, but also poetic instructions or poetic examples of what the result should be like. And let the musicians find the way to the result themselves. And that often creates very beautiful music because they are experts in how to do things, but they want to know why they need to do it. Right? Why they need to do a certain effect or whatever. And if the reason is clear to them, like in this poem, then they have lots of freedoms and they can do whatever they want to do. Yes, the metaphors are very powerful. The metaphors are very can create a kind of state of understanding of what the music should be, and leave freedom for the musician to find their own way. It's kind of not process oriented like a lot of composition is, but goal oriented.
Yeah, but this brings me to the next question. You called it metaphors, and you said sentence like this, bees buzzing and so, and brings the musician to something, to a special kind of moving and so. The word emotion contains the word motion, and you are moving the musicians by the sentences. They then are moving, and at the end of the day in the concert, the audience gets moved by this. This is, first of all, just the physical thing, not more. But you know that emotion has not only this physical meaning, it has some more. What is for you emotion, and has it to do something with music or not, or?
Yes and no. I think emotions are things that we learn. Not the emotion itself, but when it appears. It's something that we as human beings learn in most of the contexts. And a lot of art is really about finding codes that can tell people this emotion is present in this context. There's a famous cartoon by Gary Larson that I really like, where you see a bar pianist in a saloon in the West, in the Old West, and he's playing something, and then a guy standing next to the piano says, "Oh, the villain has appeared in the door. Switch to minor." And this joke embodies kind of the cultural significance of how we attribute things to emotions. Because, of course, the minor scale, which most people trained in listening to Western music would see as something more sad and more reflective than the major scale, exists in other contexts too, in other cultures too, but does not have the same emotionality. It has a different emotionality. And Indian music in particular, which is something that I have grown up with and have been exposed to a lot. I'm not an expert on Indian music by far, but it's something that I feel very close to because of my personal heritage, but also because of my about 30 years of work with Indian musicians. And in this Indian music universe, emotions are highly classified and verified. So there are many individual things that can evoke certain emotions. Scales can evoke one emotion, but then the melodies in that scale can evoke another emotion, and so on, so on. A certain ornament can evoke a certain emotion, and that are all of these are codified things because I don't hear them. It's very clear to me that they're there. I hear my colleagues say this is, and they all agree, you know. And I don't. I just don't hear it. I don't feel the emotion. So that experience tells me that there is, in art music and in musical language in general, we learn a lot about emotion from the context in which the music has been played or it has been learned or has been taught. So yes, there is emotion in music, but how much of it is innate or how much of it is in the music and not in the culture?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, is that? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's a crucial question.
That's a crucial question. Yeah. And it's also a question for a composer because you might have ideas about a new music that has nothing to do with emotion, right? It might be a purely structural idea, or it might be purely a kind of consideration of relationships and something like this. And you cannot escape the fact that you will produce emotion. And in many cases, and that's what I see with students, but also with colleagues sometimes, I have the feeling that they think because they have not put any emotion into the music that there is nothing that will come out of it. Yeah. And I don't think that's true. I think that there is always something that comes out of it. Or as every theater director knows, nothing that happens on stage has no meaning. Yeah. So if there's a chair on stage, which maybe has been forgotten, but the audience will think the chair has some importance. Yes. It must mean something. Why is there a chair on stage? You know. Yes. So in the same way, the kind of products of emotionless composing or rational composing, which is some stream of composing that has had a great number of followers over the years, produces emotions, but we don't know which ones. And especially the composer doesn't know which ones. And so I think for me, I would not want to engage in something where I don't at least have an idea of what kind of emotions the music that comes out can produce. I don't want to engage in an activity where I think, okay, this is just an experiment, and I don't want to know what emotions it can, and I don't want to be aware of them. Now, in improvisation, of course, you cannot really know what the emotions will be if you prescribe certain, say, play with that scale and play in that rhythm. So you don't really know what the emotions will be because you don't know what the music will be. Yeah. So very often the poetry that I use serves to this purpose. Say, I want this kind of a sound, of an emotion. Yeah. However you feel about it. And that's very important in my work because very often the musicians I work with are not from the Western tradition and don't have the same emotional attributes to their music. And so music can come out that for them has a certain emotion because I asked them to have that emotion in their music, and I don't hear that emotion. I don't feel that emotion. Yeah. And it becomes something else. It becomes another kind of quality. And for me, playing on this level, playing on the level of misunderstood and maybe misrepresented emotions is a very deep vein for me of creating music. So I acknowledge the presence of the power of music to evoke emotions. But I don't think music as such has emotions as a kind of part of its makeup. It produces emotions. Given the right circumstances, it's like a tree. If you plant it in the wrong earth, it will not grow. And if you plant it in the right earth, it will grow. So this kind of...
or like a landscape, or like the sky, the night stars. I think they don't have emotion. I don't know. Yeah, but I think so. But I have emotion when I'm watching them.
Yes.
Yeah. So they are moving me, but they get not moved. Well, maybe by me. Yeah, because I'm too small. Yeah. So for that.
Yeah.
This is. Yeah, the emotion thing is really, really a subject, especially in contemporary music. So there is music, when I understand you right, there is music where the musicians really avoided to produce emotion, but it produces emotion because a sound is a moving air, and so it is moving your ear, and this is moving the brain cells and everything, and then emotion comes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the discussion is more whether these emotions, well, in history we have emotions we call love, emotions we could know as fear, or to be afraid, or whatever. And for me, it's quite interesting, the question whether what is learned, as you said, and what is natural, belongs to our natural survival tools. For example, if you hit with your foot on the ground to threaten someone when you get angry, then not only a person jumps aside, also a dog does it. Yeah? So is there something that belongs to our, I will call it, our sense of orientation, so that when something very loud is for us threatening, because it can only be loud if it's big, it's associated with big, and near. And near, unexpected, big means life danger. Yeah? So a super loud chord suddenly coming has this effect. Yeah? But other emotion, like is that love or lovely or so, is, well, it's not different, I think, because, for example, if you just do this, then it's something different as the same moving and other intention when I clap here. So, or when I beat there. So the intensity of something evokes different reactions in us. So, and maybe it's better to call it a reaction than an emotion, because the emotion word is so, you know, a movie and suddenly a couple is kissing each other and so on. Now comes the music for the love. So, yeah, you know what this, but it never could be, we learned that. But on the other hand, it could not be the opposite of this without it irritate our inner human behavior. Do you agree with that, or?
Yes, what you described, I think, is when I said emotion is learned. Of course, I think that emotion is a social construct, and what you described as feelings or as reactions is not a cultural construct. It's as you say, a human constant, a neurological constant of being a human being. And I think this distinction is very important because I've always been moved by one question by François Bernard Mache, a French composer, who in some context said he had heard some Indian music which he had never heard before. And then he said, and I was deeply moved, but how could it be that I was moved by something where I had no idea what it was, because I'd never read anything about Indian music or anything. And so this question of what is universal in music as opposed to cultural is a big question. It was dismissed in the 1960s and 70s because until then, people who said music is universal always meant Brahms, Beethoven or Bach.
Yes, yeah.
And of course that's not universal, that's very cultural. But Masche's question, I think, is very pertinent. And it speaks to the fact that music has cross-cultural significance because it speaks to these primal behaviors that we have. It can speak to them. And we might totally misunderstand the cultural signification, but the primal reaction would not go away. And it will translate into emotion for ourselves. I've written actually a big text about this based on the Indian theory of emotions, which is the Rasa Bhava theory, which is very complicated and not maybe the subject of this talk. But in any case, it's been something which I have called creative misunderstanding. And where you can, there is a possibility of understanding that you don't understand, and that you understand in a wrong way. It doesn't take away the aesthetic enjoyment because you still enjoy something.
Yes.
But you cannot assume that what you enjoy is actually the same thing that the other person enjoys. Like your example with the rose, but with the concrete object in between, with the concrete musical experience or artistic experience in between. And and the Indian theory is that that artworks in general are these objects that people can agree on to have emotions, certain emotions. And they explain this intraculturally. They say, okay, so if I produce a certain scale, and it has been agreed that this scale has an emotion, then somebody else can also experience the same emotion, and thereby I can use it. So it's an effective communication device.
Yeah, but the same is not the same. at the end.
Well, in theory, in the Indian emotional theory, it's the same, because they have entire catalogs in the Natya Shastra, which is the old. They have entire catalogs on what it means if your hand turns this way or turns that way or this way. Yeah. So there's an entire cultural codification of every possible feeling or reaction.
But
and they say that an artist has to do that. That the task of an artist is to use these different reactions in order to create a complex emotion. And my take on it is to say that's true, but the same production that somebody has made, an artist has made something that in their culture will produce a predictable reaction, can also produce entirely unpredictable reactions if you take it out of context.
Yes.
And these unpredictable reactions can have an artistic value too.
Yes, sure.
And that's part of what I'm sometimes working on in my pieces, to have something that for one person has a certain significance, and it's very deeply felt, and for others it has a completely different significance, which can also be deeply felt. Yeah. But it's a different one.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
And so again, the emotion is not in the thing.
Yeah.
It is something that comes to us that we construct from the thing.
Yeah, that reminds me to a situation when I was in the McDowell colony in Peterborough, New Hampshire. I had a stipend to be there, a scholarship to be there, and there was once a week there was a presentation of other artists, and there was Richard McCann, a wonderful poet from Washington. He read for us his long poem Nights of 1919. 1990, yeah? And many people showed some reaction on that. And at that time, my English was so bad that I could not understand poetry. By reading maybe, but not by listening. And so I decided just to listen to the beauty of the reading, of the music. And this was, for me, a beautiful experience. Maybe I was the only who could just, because he did not understand the content, could enjoy the sound, because the other thing was not there. Yeah? And the other situation, what it reminds me, is when I first heard the Korean language in my life, did not understand any word. I thought it sounds sometimes as if some pigeons are talking to each other, burugu, buru, something like that. So, yeah. And after I learned better English and after I learned better Korean, I cannot feel that anymore. Well, this beauty of this moment, only listening to the sound without getting disturbed by the content, and now the content is there. And this, so because you said it does not go away, it does not go away at that moment, but it can go away by learning this culture. Yeah, I think now we should become, for our audience, a little bit more practical to understand what you are working on right now, what you are composing. Could you describe a little bit about that?
So I just described a little bit the fact that I was working with misunderstandings, and this comes from a practice that I've been doing for the last 10 years, which is to work with ensembles in which each musician comes from a different music-making tradition.
Yeah.
So they misunderstand each other all the time.
Yeah.
And I've done this not with the same people. I have one ensemble in Berlin, which has been working with me. So now they know each other, and the potential for misunderstanding is much less than before. But I've again and again gone to another city, been invited to another city like Oslo, Toronto, or Istanbul, to work with local musicians, again drafted from very different pools that are important in that city, and brought them together for working periods and a concert, mostly in a project. So in these projects, I don't call myself a composer at all. There's a word that a friend of mine has coined, Julian Klein. He has said this kind of work is called mise en musique, and like the French word for stage directing, but music directing, but not in the other sense of music directing that already exists in the English, but in the way of creating work like a stage director creates a new piece with actors. I create new pieces with musicians from nothing. Collective creation. And I am kind of the representative of the listener.
Yeah.
I'm sitting there listening to something, and then I say, I think what you just did was beautiful, but then something went wrong. Could we again try this thing that you already very successfully did in improvising together? But then there was a switch in energy. I don't know what happened. Maybe you looked away or you got distracted. Stay in this focus, and then they do it again, and they try to remember what I said. And in a way, the entire score of the piece becomes the collective memory of the group from this process of developing music, right? So we start with nothing and slowly advance into ideas. So that's something that I've been doing again and again with very different groups, very different kinds of musicians. And it's a really beautiful way for me of not being a composer and yet being in music. Yeah. The other thing that is more closely related to composing are indeed projects with the Berlin Ensemble, where this process is not so much necessary anymore after 10 years. We have become good friends, and everybody knows the other's music well enough to understand what they're doing, and so on and so on. So what I do there is to devise the kind of scores that I spoke about earlier, comprovisation scores, where I ask them to react to each other in a certain way and do certain things that they would not normally do when they freely improvise, because they are communicating with the other person. The way of communication is very strong. And so what I'm currently doing in this vein is a piece for a performance in Belgium in 2 months, or in 1.5 months. And the performance is called To Sing While Drowning. It's a reflection on...
To sing while drowning.
Exactly, to sing while drowning. Songs, basically songs to sing while drowning, but without this word songs. And it is a reflection on the state of the world right now. And in a kind of way saying, well, if we drown, we can at least sing, but do that in a reflection on what we did wrong, or what we're doing wrong, or what is going wrong, or so on.
Do we need to understand that as a metaphor, this drowning, or is it really to sing underwater drowning?
It's a metaphor,
yeah.
But of course it's also real, because many people do drown in climate change times. And drowning, I mean, in Pakistan right now, Italy, in Germany, in Australia. So there's many people who actually die while drowning.
Yeah.
And of course...
Do they sing?
No, they don't sing, of course. And this is kind of I've written a long poem, which is, in this case, a real poem, a proper poem, that speaks about how about all the reactions that people have towards this situation. You know, some say, well, you know, it's the others who are drowning, not me. And while you're already half underwater, you still think you're not drowning because your mouth is still, you can still sing, you know, and you can still do things. And the water is only till your chin. And so it's kind of it's a very meditative poem, very kind of poetic. It's not a political poem, to say. And this poem is the backbone. It's going to be spoken, and we are in a forest. We're not in a concert hall. It's in something called the Klankenbos in Pelt in Belgium, and it's all, the poetry has been translated into Flemish, and so there will be actors speaking that poetry, and the musicians are dispersed throughout the forest. And I already made a radio play on the same subject, so there are many tracks and sounds that I already have from the radio play. And what I'm currently doing is to find an architecture for this entire evening, recitation, musicians improvising. We also even have a portable, movable carillon, so that the big Flemish tradition of carillon playing is present in the forest. And we have the sounds coming from an electronic source in the forest, and how to make a dramaturgy for people who walk through that forest so that they experience the music in a way, and that the musicians can react both to the sounds that come from the electronic sources, which are many interviews with people who were drowned or not, people who were displaced by flooding, and reflections by people on melting glaciers and so on. Many science broadcasts that I took and took things from, as well as sounds that are artificially created and remind you of sounds of water. So all of that together, how does an architecture for this work that is not composed in a sense as a one-dimensional path, because I don't know who will listen to what first.
Sure.
And so it needs to be, it's not an installation, it's really only 1 hour long, so but people will experience it in different ways. So how does this, how can I create an experience that everybody has a sense of the trajectory and also gets seduced to go on further, not to stand with one person. So all of this, so there's a kind of dramaturgy for the public that is part of this piece, and that's what I'm trying to get my head around right now. I'm planning, I'm thinking about ways of doing that. All the while, I'm also thinking of what the musicians should actually have as instructions. Because they, of course, I mean, I know them well enough by now, so I could simply say, it will be good. If they just stand in the wood and listen to what is around them and they react to it, it will be great. People will think it's great because they're such good musicians. And but I want there to be a little more, and that's what you said in your first question. What is the different mind frame of a composer? The composerly mind frame is that I want it to not only to be a quite good experience, I want it to be something that touches more deeply. I don't want it to be something where people go, oh, that was quite good. I want it to be something where they go away and think, I was really moved by something that happened. So that's what I want to prepare for. I want to prepare for the possibility that this emotion can happen. And that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, that's very interesting because this word moved in English, we have this moving in emotion and in moved and also in movement. So this moving, over 10 years, always when I had an idea about moving, I wrote a little note down, and then I stopped after 10 years, and I called the thing moved. So this is for me very interesting to hear that there are some coincidences. So yeah, this is beautiful. And so before we come to the next step, I would like to ask you a question. Go back to what you said before. You called it imagination, imago. I want to make up another word, inspiration. What is for you inspiration? What is that?
It's a word that's overused by certain discourses on art. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think many artists have a problem with the word inspiration. Yeah. Nevertheless, as I said, there are mornings where I can write and there are mornings where I cannot write. Yeah. So this is probably what is meant by that. Yeah. And it's kind of, I see it always, we were talking about these energy flows and so, and sometimes there's the right moment, the energy flows come together, and if there's an ideal atmosphere in which one can write or think or conceive something that carries beyond this moment. And I don't know if it's inspiration as such, because I think that there's a path to being a creative person, and the path is really something that takes you out of the practical world in one way. Mm-hmm. And at some point I said, actually, artists and businessmen are very much alike, because they always look at the world and say, what's in it for me? Yeah. So businessmen will look at everything and say, where's the money in it? Yeah. And an artist will say, look at everything they encounter, where's the art potential in it? And I think that's a very, it offended many of my artist colleagues who don't like businessmen. Yeah. But in a sense, there is a kind of transparency to reality. Yes. Reality is not the thing that defines how you move in the world, how you walk through the world. It's a kind of, there's a transparency to the world that gives you a sense of what these things that you encounter, how could they come together to produce meaning? Yeah. And very often they don't, but sometimes they do, and that's maybe the moment of inspiration, where certain constellations of things come together. Mm-hmm. Your emotions, the other people's emotions, a sound, a constellation, space, something you have read, something you have seen, something that somebody said. And they all come together, and suddenly there is something that makes all these disparate streams clinched into one thing.
Yeah, this is about the inspiration. There is a wonderful essay. I think originally it was a lecture by Octavio Paz, and he had some lectures at the Harvard University. And Octavio Paz, in this essay, he describes that in early times, when everyone in Europe believed in a God, inspiration, this the name says, be inspired, gave me something or not. When I was not inspired, then I didn't get anything. So it was no problem. But later on, it became a problem, and people got angry because they didn't agree with this idea that a God is giving them something, but they still had this emotion, they recognized that it that you are sometimes inspiring and sometimes not. And then Octavio Paz brings the two examples, a person who is just in trance writing and suddenly it stops. And the other makes every very detailed schedule, but at the end it does not fit. And then suddenly it fits. And so what we're doing there? And he said he comes at the end to a very interesting. So then he said, what was in subjectivism time? How did I see this there, or the Dada time, and so. And because the view on the world always changed, but the experience with inspiration, that it sometimes is there, sometimes not, is always there. And he comes to the following thing, but I like this, it's also very beautiful, that inspiration is, well, he says, Heraclitus said, no man ever steps into the same river twice. So, because the river is always changing and we are also ever changing. And he says every artist, when you talk to them, speak about some energy that is a collaborator in this work, in his work. But who is this collaborator? And he comes to this idea via Heraclitus, he comes to that he says, inspiration is to be aware of your own changing. And the other person, who the collaborator is the person you just have been and you are not anymore, and the person you just becoming. So this is, and to feel this is the inspiration. And when you don't feel it, then the inspiration is not there because you don't feel it. Yeah? And do you think that there is something others co-working when you are composing? Some other energy or whatever. You don't need to name it a god or whatever. This is not necessary. This spirit in inspiration. Forget about the tradition that it is meant that is its God or so. Yeah, it can also be an energy or so. Whatever. How is it in your work? Is there something like that? That you feel not alone while working? That you get support?
No, not in that way. I think that's not how I experience it. I don't feel alone in my work, but that's not due to some other presence, but because I am not myself when I work. I am not Sandeep Bhagwati. I'm somewhere else where I don't have a name, where I'm not, the father of my children and the husband of my wife, and I'm not the professor, and I'm not whatever I usually am in the world. I don't have a role, and maybe I'm not even there as a person. That's what I feel. It's like an absence. I'm absent from the world. And I'm sort of abstracted from reality, and I'm in something else that is very, I can still interact with reality. I can take a pen and write things on paper.
Sure.
But and this was what Csikszentmihalyi has called the flow, right? I'm flowing somewhere where there is something that goes on, and all I have to do is to not interrupt it in some way, and just do it. So
may I understand it so that you are not Sandeep Bhagwati, you are something like an energy?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I haven't labeled it, but it's very clear to me that when I have a good idea, I lose track of time, for example, right? I start with something, and 3 hours later, I'm still not tired, and I still do it. And when there's an interruption, I become aware that time has passed, but I don't know how. And it's just passed. And so these are very happy moments, in a sense, you know.
Because it's happening.
Because there's something going on.
Yeah.
But I'm not thinking about something else or somebody else or some other thing. I don't think I'm thinking about myself at all as a person. I'm just in the thing or in whatever it is that I'm doing.
Is it comparable to what we call daydreaming? That you forget, suddenly you miss 5 minutes or you miss an hour or so, and because you were not aware, really?
Yeah, that happens too, of course. Daydreaming happens too, but it's not the same as this other thing. Because in daydreaming, I'm aware of myself as a person. And I think when I'm writing, I'm not aware of myself as a person anymore. I'm just aware of the things that I'm doing. It's like some authors describe how when they write novels, the persons in the novel become real, and they cannot do anything against the will of that person. And that means that the author is absent.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
In a sense, in this very emotional sense, you're not yourself anymore. You're this other thing that has its own life. It's all a metaphor. It doesn't have its real life, but it has a kind of a reality that has its own inner laws, which may be the laws that you made, but which are not laws that you can break, even though you made them happen. You know. So, but I think that one could, in principle, construct this if one were conditioned by one's own culture as divine intervention or the presence of the divine. And I've always liked that this idea, for example, in the Ilias, the presence of the divine is not that suddenly a figure appears and Athene appears or something like this. Yeah. It's that the entire air changes. The entire world is different. And it's the same world, but it's different. And that's the presence of a god. Yeah. And that's how Homer and the Greeks saw it. And that's something that's a cultural definition. You can also define it differently, but you can say this is the presence of a god. Yeah. And so what I described is something like this. You're still in reality. I mean, I still can drink a cup of tea, or I can write down a piece I can write on a computer, and I can worry about solving a complicated problem in the software or something like that. Yet, it's not me not me as a emotional person who has social roles who is doing that. Yeah.
Isn't that the beauty of the work?
That's certainly why I do it.
Yes.
To get there.
I just could see this in your eyes. Yeah.
That's
you
why
got some sparkling in your eyes.
That's why I do it. That's when I'm happy.
Yeah.
And it's actually very funny because everybody expects me to be happy at the premiere of the piece. But that's actually a very sad moment.
Yes, I know this. Yes, I know that. Yeah, because we are unable to enjoy that because we're always checking everything. So it's like the architect. Does it break? Does it not break? So
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not the moment of enjoyment.
No.
And I think it's very interesting that for the outside world, the family and other people around me, they always think that the premiere should be, that's the reward, that people clap after the piece, you know. Yeah. No, the reward is in the work itself. It's not, the clapping is irrelevant to it.
Yeah, well, this reminds me to a very interesting thing, because this when you look about there are some brain scientist, Andrew Huberman, and he said not to push the dopamine to the result, because the result goes always away, the result, because just if it's there, the next result you're expecting, you should connect the dopamine to the work, yeah, and this is the joy is the work.
Yes.
Yeah. This is the ideal situation, that you enjoy your work. Yeah. And once a tax consultant said, there is one thing an office person in the tax office of the of the government, of the finance, would never understand with artists, that he keeps on working even when he does not earn money with it. Yeah, because some people stop working when it's 5 o'clock or whatever, yeah, and because they don't get longer money. But for us, I think that time does not exist. We are working on the time, of course, because it's time work, but how much time we spend with it, it's not so important. If something great is coming out in 5 seconds, we are happy. If it takes a week, it's happy, and we're doing it even when we don't earn money with it. Yeah, this is not the reason. And we are so privileged people that everyone has to pay money when it comes to life, and has to pay entrance fee. And if you are privileged, for example, as a composer, then you can choose the currency. Yeah? Yes, and our currency is that what you just described. Yeah, these moments. This is our salary. And therefore, this is also a reason why we do other jobs to get the money, because we need also food, of course. Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, this is not. I mean, it's not only something that artists experience, but I think there is a potential that every person can experience that, but with different things.
Yeah.
But artists have chosen a way of life where they can systematically seek this out.
Yes.
So, and where they have a way of finding it without using, drugs or other substances or other ways of finding this kind of bliss of absence.
Yeah.
And it's the interesting thing. It's a total presence that is the absence. Then you're totally present, and that's why you're absent. All of this is nothing new, of course, but I still think it's because we discuss inspiration and imagination. It's where all these things come to, and which cannot be described. Which I think always where these words lack descriptive power, because imagination as a concept is not really what people think it is, because it's not something where you dream up something that is, it's an undreamy state. It's a very present state, and you just get into it through a non-focus on yourself, on your own desires.
Yes.
There's a wonderful sentence in the Gilgamesh epos that I find very inspiring, which may become the title for one of my pieces. We must treasure the dream, whatever its terrors. And that this dream is, of course, not a pleasant dream, and not something that like in this follow your dream. It's not that kind of a dream. It's the dream is this kind of present reality that is so unlikely and that is full of terrors because you don't know what's going to happen. And this is what you cherish when you do art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I think we had a long conversation, and for me it was very interesting to hear your thoughts, to listen to your ideas, and to listen to your explanations. And thank you so much for coming here, and all the best for you, and great success.
Thank you so much for having me here. These are things that you never talk about with a journalist. These are things you talk about with a colleague, and I'm very happy that you initiated this collegial conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.